Welcome back to Sleep with Stories. Tonight, if you wish, I would like to invite you somewhere warm, somewhere hidden within the endless wonders of the Hidden Library, where stories rest quietly upon ancient shelves and floating lanterns drift through midnight blue halls beneath the gentle glow of a crescent moon. Perhaps you have wandered these corridors before. Perhaps you have walked beside Elias through chambers filled with ticking clocks, or stood with him upon the banks of the Lantern River, watching countless lights drift softly across still waters. And perhaps, like many travelers who find their way here, you have discovered that the Hidden Library offers more than knowledge. It offers comfort, a place to pause, a place to breathe, a place to simply be. Tonight's journey begins in a quieter corner of that extraordinary world, not within grand observatories, nor hidden wings filled with magical artifacts, but along a peaceful street that very few visitors ever notice, a street that reveals itself only to those who have been carrying a little too much for a little too long. The evening had settled gently across the Hidden Library. The towering bookshelves glowed softly beneath floating lantern light. Pages rustled faintly in distant reading halls. Somewhere beyond sight, the familiar ticking of ancient clocks marked the passing hours. Elias walked slowly through these comforting spaces. His dark blue traveler's cloak moved softly with each step, its subtle gold embroidery catching fragments of lantern light. His leather satchel rested comfortably at his side. There was no destination in mind, no mystery demanding to be solved, no urgent task awaiting him, only the quiet desire to wander. He had come to understand that the Hidden Library often revealed its most meaningful discoveries during such unhurried moments, when expectations were set aside and curiosity was allowed to lead. He passed through familiar corridors lined with endless bookshelves. Floating lanterns drifted overhead, their golden glow reflecting softly against polished stone floors. Readers sat tucked within alcoves, lost within beloved stories. Others rested peacefully beneath warm blankets in cozy corners designed for those who had fallen asleep among the books. Everything felt calm, safe, timeless. Eventually, Elias noticed that the architecture around him had begun to change. The vast cathedral-like halls of the library gave way to narrower passageways. Stone arches softened into ivy-covered walls. The scent of old parchment slowly faded, replaced by hints of lavender, fresh bread, and rain upon cobblestones. Curious, he continued onward. The corridor opened at last onto a quiet street, unlike any he had seen before. small lanterns hung from wrought iron brackets. Flower boxes overflowed beneath shuttered windows. Neatly swept pathways wound between charming stone houses. Everything rested beneath the gentle embrace of evening, the kind of evening that invited people indoors, toward warm kitchens, comfortable chairs, soft conversation. One by one, Elias noticed that the windows around him had gone dark. Families had retired for the night. Curtains had been drawn. The street had settled into peaceful stillness. Then he saw it. At the far end of the lane stood a single house. Its stone walls glowed softly beneath climbing roses. Its front steps appeared worn smooth by countless years of welcome, and from every one of its windows, light shone outward into the night. Warm golden light, steady, gentle, inviting. Dozens of glowing windows illuminated the quiet street, each one carrying the unmistakable promise of comfort. Elias slowed his pace. He could hear no voices from within, no laughter, no music, only silence. Yet somehow, the house felt profoundly alive, as though each glowing room held something precious, something worth preserving. He stood for a moment beneath the lantern-lit sky, watching those warm windows, and a curious thought drifted quietly through his mind. Perhaps some places were not built merely of stone and timber. Perhaps they were built from shared evenings, small kindnesses, familiar routines, and the countless ordinary moments that gently shaped a life. The simple comfort of tea prepared at the end of a long day, the sound of rain against familiar windows, the turning of pages beside a crackling fire, the knowledge that someone had left a light burning because they expected you home. Elias took a slow breath, then another. The street remained quiet around him. The house waited patiently ahead. There was no urgency here, no danger, only invitation, only warmth, and perhaps the promise of discovering that some of life's most meaningful stories are found not in extraordinary adventures, but within the gentle glow of ordinary evenings. If you are comfortable now, allow your shoulders to soften. Allow the steady rhythm of your breathing to slow. Imagine lantern light dancing softly across old cobblestones. Imagine warm windows shining through the blue hush of night. And if you wish, join Elias as he walks toward the welcoming house at the end of the street, toward the place where every window glowed and where the smallest moments were treasured most of all. The evening air carried the quiet fragrance of lavender and rain-washed stone, and for a little while, Elias simply stood where he was. The house remained at the end of the narrow street, its many windows glowing warmly against the deepening blue of the night. Around him, the hidden library seemed to breathe differently here. The grand halls and endless shelves he had come to know so well felt very far away. This district possessed its own rhythm, a gentler one. Flower boxes rested beneath shuttered windows. Tiny lanterns swayed above polished doorways. Stone pathways curved between houses draped in climbing ivy. Every detail spoke of patience, care, and the quiet rituals of daily life. Elias adjusted the leather strap of his satchel. He had wandered the library long enough to understand that unusual places often appeared without explanation. The hidden library rarely announced its intentions. Instead, it offered invitations, soft nudges toward discoveries waiting to unfold. Tonight, it seemed that invitation had taken the form of a warmly illuminated house. He resumed walking. His footsteps fell softly upon the cobblestones. The lanterns overhead cast pools of golden light that shifted gently as they swayed. In one nearby garden, late blooming flowers released their sweet fragrance into the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime stirred. Its delicate notes drifted across the street like fragments of a forgotten lullaby. Elias slowed his pace. There was something soothing about this place, the kind of comfort that asked nothing of those who encountered it. No expectations, no performances, only permission to rest. He passed a small wooden bench, positioned beneath an old chestnut tree. A folded blanket rested neatly across its back. Beside it, someone had placed a stack of well-loved books, protected beneath a glass canopy. The titles had faded with time, yet their presence felt intentional, as though someone had thought carefully about what another traveler might need. A place to sit, a story to borrow, a moment of peace. Elias smiled faintly. The hidden library was filled with extraordinary wonders, celestial observatories, endless archives, rivers illuminated by drifting lanterns. Yet he found himself increasingly moved by quieter things. The thoughtful arrangement of cushions in a reading alcove, fresh tea left warming beside an empty chair, the familiar comfort of lantern light guiding weary travelers home. Perhaps, he reflected, magic was not always found within grand spectacles. Perhaps it lived just as naturally within small acts of kindness. Ahead, the glowing house waited patiently. Its windows had grown brighter as he approached. Rich amber light spilled across the garden path, leading toward its front steps. He paused at the small iron gate surrounding the property. Rose vines curled gracefully along its frame. Tiny blossoms nodded softly in the evening breeze. Elias rested his hand upon the latch. For reasons he could not entirely explain, emotions stirred quietly within him. Not sadness, not longing, something gentler, the feeling of arriving somewhere he had needed. Without ever realizing he had been searching for it, the gate opened with little more than a whisper. He stepped onto the stone pathway beyond. The gardens surrounding the house had been lovingly maintained. Lavender bordered the walkway. White jasmine climbed wooden trellises. Tiny lanterns nestled among the flower beds, cast warm halos against the earth. Everything encouraged stillness. Everything encouraged care. At the base of the front steps, Elias paused once more. He looked back over the peaceful street. The neighboring homes rested in darkness, their curtains drawn, their occupants surrendered to quiet evenings and restful sleep. Only this house remained awake, every window glowing, every room illuminated. He wondered who lived there, what stories unfolded beyond those walls, what moments had filled the rooms beyond sight. The polished wooden steps creaked softly beneath his boots as he climbed toward the front porch. Closer now, he noticed intricate carvings decorating the doorframe. Tiny stars, branches heavy with blossoms, open books surrounded by flowing ribbons. The craftsmanship possessed an unmistakable tenderness. Someone had created this place with great affection. A brass knocker rested at eye level. Its surface gleamed softly in the lantern light, worn smooth by countless visitors. Elias lifted his hand toward it, then hesitated. The hidden library had taught him many things, foremost among them that thresholds mattered. The moment before entering somewhere new carried its own quiet significance. A final breath before discovery, an opportunity to set aside expectations, to arrive fully present. He allowed himself that pause, breathing in the scent of jasmine carried upon the cool evening air, listening to the distant song of wind chimes, feeling the steady rise and fall of his heartbeat. Then, before his hand could reach the knocker, the door opened, slowly, silently. Warm light spilled outward onto the porch. It wrapped around Elias like the embrace of a thick blanket on a winter evening. Within that golden glow stood an elderly woman. She was small in stature. Silver hair had been gathered neatly behind her head. Soft lines framed kind eyes that held the peaceful wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime listening carefully. She regarded Elias with gentle curiosity. Then she smiled. The expression transformed her entire face. "Good evening," she said softly. Her voice carried the warmth of familiar kitchens and well-loved stories. Elias lowered his hand. "Good evening." The woman inclined her head. "I was beginning to wonder when you might arrive." Elias blinked. "You were expecting me." The corners of her eyes crinkled pleasantly. "Oh," she said. "Not precisely." She stepped aside, making room within the doorway. "But this house has a habit of knowing when someone could benefit from its company." Behind her, Elias caught glimpses of softly lit hallways lined with bookshelves. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the air. Somewhere deeper within the house, an old clock chimed the passing hour. The woman extended a welcoming hand. "My name is Mira." "Elias," he replied. "A pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine." Mira's gaze lingered upon him for a moment, not assessing, not questioning, simply seeing. "You've traveled far tonight," she observed gently. Elias considered correcting her. After all, he had not ventured beyond the hidden library's walls. Yet somehow, he sensed that Mira spoke of another kind of journey entirely, one measured not in distance, but in weariness, in quiet perseverance, in all the invisible efforts that accompanied daily life. Perhaps, he thought, everyone arrived carrying something unseen. Mira stepped back toward the warmth beyond the threshold. "If you would like," she said softly, "there is always room for one more guest." Elias glanced once more toward the lantern-lit street behind him. Everything remained peaceful, safe, unhurried. Then he returned his attention to the welcoming glow awaiting beyond the doorway. Curiosity settled comfortably beside trust. He offered Mira a small nod. "I would be honored." Mira's smile widened ever so slightly. "Then come inside." And with that, Elias crossed the threshold into the house, where every window glowed, unaware that, within its many rooms, he would discover that some of life's most extraordinary treasures were hidden within the gentlest of evenings. Warm light wrapped itself around Elias as he stepped fully into the house where every window glowed. Behind him, the front door closed with the softest click. The peaceful street outside faded gently into silence. For a few moments, Elias simply stood within the entrance hall. The house carried its own kind of stillness, not the hush of an empty place, but the comforting quiet of a home settling at the end of a long day. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon, fresh bread, lavender, and old books whose pages had been turned many times by caring hands. A long runner carpet stretched across polished wooden floors. Lanterns nestled within alcoves cast pools of amber light against stone walls. Paintings hung throughout the hallway, not portraits of kings or scholars, but simple moments. A family gathered around a supper table, two friends sharing tea beside an open window, a child asleep beneath a patchwork quilt, while rain tapped softly against the glass. Elias found himself slowing his breathing. Everything within this house encouraged gentleness. "Please," Mira said quietly beside him. "There is no need to hurry here." Elias turned toward the elderly woman. Up close, he noticed the kindness woven into every detail of her expression. The fine silver strands escaping her neatly pinned hair, the softness of her smile, the patient way she waited, never rushing another person's thoughts. "You care for this house?" Elias asked. Mira folded her hands comfortably before her. "For a very long time now," she replied, "though I believe it would be more accurate to say." Her eyes brightened with quiet amusement. "That the house cares for all of us." Elias glanced down the warmly illuminated corridor. "You speak as though it has a will of its own." Mira tilted her head thoughtfully. Many places within the hidden library possess their own form of awareness. The lantern river chooses which memories it reveals. The observatory above the clouds decides which constellations to share. This house, she rested her fingertips gently against the nearby wall, remembers comfort. The words settled softly within Elias. Remembers comfort, not events, not achievements, comfort. Mira motioned for him to follow. Their footsteps remained quiet against the polished floorboards as they moved deeper into the house. Bookshelves lined portions of the hallway, unlike those within the hidden library. These shelves held cookbooks with handwritten notes tucked between their pages, travel journals documenting ordinary holidays, collections of favorite poems, gardening guides, albums filled with pressed flowers. Everything spoke of lives lovingly lived. "What exactly is this place?" Elias asked softly. Mira paused beside a small wooden table. A porcelain teapot rested there beside two delicate cups painted with tiny blue stars. She poured steaming tea into each cup before offering one to Elias. "It is difficult to explain," she admitted. "The house, where every window glowed, preserves evenings." Elias accepted the tea carefully. "Even sings." Mira nodded. "The world often remembers milestones, birthdays, weddings, grand adventures, moments of triumph." Her gaze softened. "But there are other moments equally deserving of remembrance. The ordinary evenings we fail to recognize while living them. The last summer supper before children grow older. The familiar sound of someone humming while preparing tea. the comfort of sharing silence beside someone who understands you. She wrapped both hands around her own teacup. Many people only realize the value of such moments long after they have passed. Elias lowered his gaze toward the steam curling from his cup. He understood. The hidden library safeguarded stories, yet stories themselves were often shaped by quieter things, the ordinary evenings that taught people what mattered. Mira began walking once more. The house keeps these moments safe, not to trap them, she clarified gently, but to honor them. Ahead, the corridor opened into another part of the house. Dozens of wooden doors lined the walls, each identical at first glance, each illuminated by a small lantern hanging nearby. Elias slowed. There are so many. Mira smiled. Far more than these. The house expands as needed. She approached the nearest doorway. Warm light glowed beneath its frame. Each room preserves the feeling of a particular evening. Not exact memories, not perfect recreations. The feeling. Elias looked toward the closed door. What determines which evenings remain here? Mira rested her hand lightly upon the doorknob. Love, she answered simply, the kind expressed through everyday kindness, the sort people often overlook while searching for extraordinary things. She turned toward him. Would you like to see? Elias hesitated only briefly before nodding. I would. Mira opened the door. Immediately, the scent of freshly baked bread drifted outward. Soft laughter followed. Elias stepped closer. Inside, a kitchen glowed beneath warm lantern light. Rain traced gentle paths down broad windows, overlooking a small garden beyond. An elderly man stood at a wooden counter, attempting to knead bread dough. His efforts appeared earnest, if somewhat clumsy. Across from him, a woman with flour dusted across her apron, tried unsuccessfully to hide her amusement. You've added too much water again, she observed kindly. The man sighed. I maintain the recipe instructions are deliberately vague. They have measurements, she replied. They have suggestions, he corrected. Her laughter filled the room, soft, familiar, affectionate. Neither person appeared aware of Elias or Mira standing nearby. The scene continued naturally, without performance, without interruption. The woman reached over, brushing flour from the man's cheek. He covered her hand gently with his own. Outside, rain continued, tapping softly against the windows. The kettle began to whistle. The man hurried awkwardly toward the stove. The woman followed, shaking her head fondly. Elias remained silent. Nothing remarkable had happened. No dramatic revelation. No life-changing event. Yet emotions stirred quietly within him. Comfort, simple, undeniable comfort. Mira watched the scene beside him. 37 years, she said softly. What? They shared 37 years together. Elias glanced toward her. This was one of the evenings she wished to preserve. He returned his attention to the kitchen. They don't remember us. No. Mira shook her head. The house does not recreate people. It preserves emotional truths, the warmth of companionship, the comfort of familiar routines, the quiet joy found within ordinary moments. The elderly couple carried their tea toward a small table positioned beside the rain-streaked windows. Neither spoke for several minutes. They simply sat together, watching the rain fall, sharing silence, existing comfortably in each other's presence. Mira's voice lowered almost to a whisper. Sometimes, she said, love sounds like laughter. Sometimes, it sounds like stories shared beside a fire. And sometimes, her eyes reflected the warm glow surrounding them. It sounds like nothing at all. Elias felt his chest tighten gently, not with sadness, with gratitude. How many such evenings existed unnoticed throughout the world? How many ordinary moments quietly shaped the people who lived them? The man reached across the table, covering the woman's hand with his own. Neither looked away from the rain beyond the windows. Neither needed words. The gesture itself contained everything necessary. After a long while, Mira closed the door softly behind them. The corridor returned. Lanterns flickered patiently overhead. Elias remained thoughtful. I think, he began slowly. I understand. Mira studied him kindly. Do you? Elias nodded. People spend so much time waiting for extraordinary moments. Perhaps he looked toward the countless doors stretching endlessly ahead. They fail to notice the extraordinary nature of ordinary ones. Mira's smile deepened. The house has always hoped visitors might discover that. She resumed her gentle pace down the corridor. Come, Elias. There are many windows still glowing tonight. And together, they continued deeper into the house, where every window glowed, where the smallest moments often carried the greatest light. Mira led Elias farther down the softly illuminated corridor, their footsteps accompanied by the gentle ticking of distant clocks. Hidden somewhere within the house, the lanterns overhead glowed with steady warmth. Their golden light rested softly against polished wooden floors and shelves lined with treasured objects. A knitted scarf folded carefully beside a collection of well-loved novels. Pressed flowers preserved between the pages of old journals. handwritten recipes tucked into ceramic bowls. Everywhere Elias looked, he found evidence of lives shaped by care. The house did not celebrate perfection. It celebrated presence, the willingness to show up day after day for the people and places one loved. Eventually, Mira slowed before another door. Unlike the others, this one stood slightly open. Soft amber light spilled through the narrow gap. Elias noticed the faint scent of pine needles drifting into the corridor. There was something else as well, the unmistakable crackle of a fireplace. Mira rested one hand against the doorframe. "This room has always been among my favorites," she said quietly. Elias glanced toward her. "Whose evening is it?" Mira's expression softened. Someone who feared they had forgotten how to rest. Gently, she pushed the door open wider. Warmth greeted them immediately. Snow drifted peacefully beyond large windows framed by heavy velvet curtains. Inside, a fire danced within a stone hearth. Its golden light illuminated books stacked in careful towers beside a deep armchair. Blankets rested, folded neatly within woven baskets. A kettle steamed quietly atop the mantel. The entire room seemed designed to invite stillness. Curled within the armchair sat an older woman wrapped in layers of knitted blankets. Silver hair framed her thoughtful face. A thick book rested open upon her lap. Nearby, a large cat slept soundly beside the fire. The woman turned another page, then another, occasionally pausing to sip tea from a nearby cup. Outside, snowflakes continued their slow descent. Inside, the fire offered its steady reassurance. Elias watched quietly. "There is no one else here," he observed. Mira nodded, "No." The elderly woman's expression remained peaceful as she read. There were many years when she believed rest had to be earned. Mira's voice remained gentle. She cared for others tirelessly. She worked hard. She carried responsibilities with grace. But she often neglected herself. Elias studied the woman. Eventually, the book slipped slightly within her hands. Rather than correcting it immediately, she allowed herself a pause. Her gaze drifted toward the snowfall beyond the windows, toward the firelight dancing across familiar walls, toward the cat curled nearby. A smile appeared upon her lips. Small, content, unhurried. This was the first evening, Mira continued softly, when she truly understood that rest was not laziness. That peace required no justification. That comfort did not need to be earned. Elias remained silent. The words settled gently within him. How many people moved through life believing they had to deserve stillness? How many postponed joy until every task had been completed. How many delayed rest indefinitely? The woman reached toward the sleeping cat. Its eyes opened briefly. After accepting several affectionate scratches, it settled back into peaceful slumber. The woman returned to her book. A few pages later, she yawned. Without resistance, she closed the cover. The fire crackled softly. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. Carefully, she adjusted her blankets, settled deeper into the armchair, and drifted into sleep. The book remained resting upon her lap. The cat shifted closer. The room embraced them both. Mira lowered her voice. There is courage in caring for others. There is courage in enduring hardship. But there is also courage. She paused in allowing oneself to rest. Elias found himself looking once more toward the sleeping figure before them. There was no urgency here, no unfinished quest demanding attention, only permission. Permission to pause, permission to breathe, permission to simply exist without expectation. After several moments, Mira quietly closed the door. The corridor welcomed them once more. Its lanterns glowed patiently overhead. Elias exhaled slowly. The house teaches, he said. Mira smiled. It remembers. She resumed walking. The lessons belong to those who choose to receive them. They passed several more doors. Behind one, soft piano music drifted faintly into the hallway. Behind another, the scent of citrus and herbs lingered invitingly. Each room contained its own quiet story, its own form of comfort. Finally, Mira stopped beside a tall window overlooking the peaceful street outside. The neighboring houses remained dark. Only this house continued shining against the evening sky. Tell me, Elias, Mira said gently, when you think of comfort, what comes to mind? Elias considered the question carefully. Images surfaced gradually. The endless shelves of the hidden library, lantern light reflecting against polished stone, the sound of pages turning, the familiar weight of his satchel after long journeys, tea shared beside observatory windows, the lantern river carrying countless lights through ancient caverns. He smiled faintly. Being somewhere I belong. Mira nodded approvingly. A beautiful answer. And you? Elias asked. What does comfort mean to you? The elderly caretaker rested her hands upon the windowsill. Her silver hair caught the lantern light surrounding them. Knowing, she replied softly, that even ordinary evenings matter. Her reflection shimmered faintly within the glass. People often wait for perfect moments, perfect circumstances. They postpone joy until life becomes simpler. Her gaze drifted toward the glowing windows surrounding them. But comfort rarely arrives through perfection. It arrives through presence. A shared meal, a familiar voice, a blanket offered without being asked. The quiet understanding that someone is glad you exist. Elias listened carefully. Outside, a lantern swayed gently above the empty street. Its light cast shifting patterns against the cobblestones below. Mira turned toward him once more. "Tonight," she said kindly, "I hope this house helps you remember that peace has always been built from small things, moments easy to overlook, but no less sacred because of their simplicity." Elias lowered his gaze thoughtfully. Then, after a quiet pause, he nodded. "I think it already has." Mira's smile returned, warm, patient, entirely genuine. "Good," she said softly, "because there are still many rooms waiting to welcome us." And together, beneath the glow of countless lanterns, they continued onward through the house, where every window glowed, where ordinary evenings became extraordinary simply because someone had chosen to treasure them. The corridor seemed to stretch farther than Elias remembered, not endlessly, but generously, as though the house understood that some evenings deserved more time. Mira's footsteps remained unhurried beside him. The soft rustle of her dark skirts accompanied the steady glow of lanterns suspended overhead. Together, they passed beneath wooden beams, adorned with dried herbs and tiny bundles of lavender tied with pale blue ribbon. The fragrance drifting through the air was soothing, familiar, the kind of scent one might associate with kitchens at dusk or bedside tables where well-loved books rested waiting for tomorrow. Eventually, they arrived before another doorway. Unlike the others, this one stood painted a gentle shade of cream. Pressed wildflowers had been carefully arranged between thin glass panels set into its frame. A small brass plaque rested beneath the handle. Its surface bore only 2 words: "Good company." Elias paused. Mira noticed his expression. "This room is often difficult for visitors to leave," she said softly, "not because it causes sadness." Her smile deepened slightly, but because it reminds them of how nourishing companionship can be. Elias glanced toward the door. "May we enter?" Mira nodded. "Of course." The door opened quietly. Immediately, the scent of chamomile tea and freshly baked pastries drifted outward. Golden afternoon light filtered through tall conservatory windows. Outside, a small garden glowed beneath the fading warmth of sunset. Inside, several armchairs had been arranged in a loose circle around a low wooden table. Teacups rested upon delicate saucers. half-finished knitting projects occupied woven baskets. Books lay open, their pages marked carefully with ribbons. Soft conversation floated gently through the room. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, simply voices woven comfortably together. Near one of the windows, two elderly women sat side by side. One knitted patiently, the other carefully trimmed dried flowers, destined for decorative arrangements. They spoke intermittently, occasionally pausing to admire the changing colors beyond the glass. They've been friends for nearly 60 years, Mira whispered. Elias watched quietly. What evening does the house preserve? Mira folded her hands before her. This one. Elias looked puzzled. Nothing extraordinary happened. The elderly caretaker regarded him kindly. They shared tea. They spoke of books. They debated whether winter arrived too quickly. They admired the sunset. She glanced toward the women, and afterward, her expression softened. One of them realized she had never truly thanked the other for decades of friendship. Elias lowered his gaze. The two women continued their peaceful conversation. One reached toward the center of the table, breaking a pastry carefully in half before offering the larger portion to her companion. The other accepted without protest. The gesture appeared entirely habitual, comfortable, natural, the kind of kindness practiced so frequently that it no longer required thought. They made one another's lives gentler, Mira said, not through grand sacrifices, but through presence, a consistency, the countless ordinary ways we communicate care. One of the women laughed suddenly, warm, unrestrained. The other shook her head in affectionate disbelief. What? Elias asked. Mira smiled. Apparently, she listened for a moment. They disagree about the proper amount of honey required in afternoon tea. Elias found himself smiling. The conversation within the room drifted onward. Recommendations for books, memories of childhood summers, speculation regarding tomorrow's weather. No revelation, no climax, only companionship. A deep sense of belonging settled throughout the conservatory. The quiet assurance that no one needed to perform in order to earn acceptance. Elias observed the women for several moments longer. Then, many people speak of finding purpose, he said thoughtfully. Mira inclined her head. Yes, but perhaps. Elias searched carefully for the right words. Being known matters just as much. The elderly caretaker regarded him warmly. I believe you may be right. Outside the conservatory windows, the sun continued its gradual descent. Shades of amber, rose, and lavender painted the evening sky. Inside, Teacups emptied slowly. Stories unfolded patiently. Knitting needles clicked rhythmically together. The world beyond the room seemed distant, unimportant. Elias closed his eyes briefly, listening. The murmur of familiar voices, the soft scrape of porcelain against polished wood, birdsong fading into evening. He understood then that loneliness was not always the absence of people. Sometimes it was the absence of being truly seen, and perhaps friendship, real friendship, offered one of life's gentlest remedies. Eventually, one of the women reached across the space separating them, resting her weathered hand lightly upon her companion's wrist. "I'm glad you came today," she said simply. The other blinked, then smiled, as though there was anywhere else I intended to be. No elaborate declaration followed, no emotional speech, only certainty, the kind built quietly over years, spent showing up for one another. Mira drew a slow breath beside him. The house treasures evenings such as these, because they remind us, she continued softly, that love exists in many forms, friendship among them. Elias nodded. The warmth within the conservatory lingered around them, comforting, steady. He wondered how many people carried memories like these. Tea shared across countless afternoons, conversations continuing long after sunset, the immeasurable gift of someone who listened without judgment. Eventually, Mira stepped gently toward the doorway. "We should continue," she whispered. Reluctantly, Elias followed. The conservatory door closed quietly behind them. The corridor welcomed them once more. Lantern light reflected against polished floors. The scent of lavender drifted softly through the air. Neither spoke immediately. Some moments required silence, time to settle. Finally, Elias glanced toward Mira. "Do you think people realize how fortunate they are?" he asked carefully. "While these evenings are happening." Mira considered the question. Sometimes, and sometimes not. Her expression remained kind. But perhaps the goal is not perfection. Perhaps it is simply remembering to notice. She looked toward the countless doors, extending farther into the house. The warmth of tea shared between friends, the comfort of familiar voices, the peace found within ordinary company. Such things deserve our attention. Elias followed her gaze. The house, where every window glowed, continued stretching ahead of them. Room after room, window after window, each preserving the quiet beauty of evenings once lived. And somewhere deep within that endless warmth, he sensed another truth emerging, that perhaps the most meaningful parts of life rarely announced themselves. They arrived softly, through kindness, through presence, through the simple act of remaining together, and beneath the steady glow of lantern light, Elias and Mira continued onward through the house, where even the gentlest forms of companionship were remembered with love. The corridor curved gently ahead, leading Elias and Mira toward a quieter wing of the house. The lanterns here glowed more softly, their golden light mingled with delicate silver hues, drifting through tall windows overlooking a moonlit courtyard. Outside, white blossoms swayed in the evening breeze. Their petals shimmered beneath the gentle light of the Hidden Library's great crescent moon. Neither Elias nor Mira hurried. The house itself seemed to encourage slower footsteps, careful observation, the simple act of being fully present. Eventually, Mira stopped before another door. Unlike the others, this one stood slightly smaller. Its pale wooden surface had been painted by hand. Tiny stars scattered across a midnight blue sky. A sleeping rabbit curled beneath an old oak tree. Several fireflies danced among painted wildflowers near the bottom edge. Elias studied the artwork quietly. "It feels different," he said softly. Mira's expression grew tender. "It is." Her fingertips brushed lightly against the painted doorframe. "Some evenings are remembered because they brought comfort. Others," she paused, "because they taught us how comfort feels." Elias glanced toward her. Mira lowered her voice. "This room belongs to a bedtime long ago." Slowly, she opened the door. Warm lamplight greeted them. A nursery unfolded before Elias' eyes. Moonlight filtered through gauzy curtains, embroidered with tiny silver stars. A wooden rocking chair rested beside a crib. Shelves lined the walls, filled with worn storybooks, plush animals, and carefully folded blankets stitched in gentle shades of cream and pale blue. The room carried the unmistakable scent of lavender soap and freshly laundered linen. Near the window, a young mother sat rocking gently in her chair. A small child rested against her shoulder. Sleepy eyes struggled valiantly to remain open. Tiny fingers clutched the edge of a beloved stuffed rabbit. The woman spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet every word carried warmth. "And so the moon promised the little fox." She read from the open storybook resting upon her lap, "that no matter how dark the forest became, the stars would always help guide him home." The child yawned, eyes fluttering closed, then reopening with determined persistence. The woman smiled, a patient smile, one clearly practiced many times before. She adjusted the blanket around the child's shoulders. continuing the story without frustration, without urgency. Outside the nursery windows, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, everything remained safe, protected, soft. Elias stood motionless near the doorway. He could almost feel the peaceful rhythm of the rocking chair. Forward, back, forward, back. The oldest lullaby known to weary caregivers everywhere. Mira observed quietly beside him. This child struggled with nighttime fears, she explained softly. Storms, strange dreams, the uncertainty that sometimes accompanies growing up. The young mother closed the storybook carefully, then rested her cheek lightly against the child's hair. It's all right, she whispered. You are safe. The words were simple, ordinary, yet something within Elias tightened gently. How often had countless parents repeated those very same reassurances? How many evenings had been shaped by patient love, expressed through repetition? The woman began humming softly, a melody neither elaborate nor remarkable, yet deeply familiar, the kind of song carried across generations, the kind remembered long after specific words had faded. The child's breathing gradually slowed, small shoulders relaxing against the security of familiar arms. Mira lowered her gaze. Many people remember achievements, she said quietly. But sometimes, her voice softened further, what remains with us are the moments someone taught us we were worthy of gentleness. The young mother carefully transferred the sleeping child into the crib. Tiny fingers resisted briefly, searching instinctively for reassurance. Immediately, her hand returned, resting lightly against the child's back, present, steady, until peaceful sleep settled completely. Only then did she step away, adjusting blankets, straightening stuffed animals, ensuring every small comfort remained within reach. She crossed toward the window, watching rain trace silver pathways down the glass. A look of quiet exhaustion touched her features, yet alongside it, love remained unmistakable. She glanced once more toward the crib, smiling softly, then settled into the rocking chair nearby, closing her own eyes for just a moment. Elias found himself speaking, almost involuntarily. She stayed. Mira nodded, again and again. No audience, no recognition, only devotion. The lantern light within the nursery glowed steadily. Outside, rain continued falling. The child slept peacefully, safe within the quiet certainty that someone had remained close through the darkest hours. Eventually, Mira drew a slow breath. The house preserves evenings such as these because they shape how we understand love, not merely romantic affection, not dramatic declarations, but care expressed through consistency, through patience, through showing up. Elias remained silent. The rocking chair swayed gently once more. The lullaby lingered faintly in memory. He wondered how many people carried invisible traces of such evenings throughout their lives. How many acts of tenderness had quietly strengthened them. How many ordinary reassurances had helped transform fear into trust. After several moments, Mira stepped carefully backward toward the doorway. "It is time," she whispered. Reluctantly, Elias followed. The nursery door closed with the utmost gentleness behind them. For a while, neither spoke. The corridor itself seemed quieter now, lantern light reflecting softly against polished wood. Finally, Elias looked toward Mira. "Do you think people understand how important these moments are?" he asked. "While they are living them." Mira considered carefully. Some do. Others only recognize their significance years later. She smiled sadly, though never unhappily. But perhaps understanding is not always necessary. What matters, she continued, is that love was offered freely. Elias lowered his gaze thoughtfully. Ahead, countless doors still waited beneath the warm glow of lanterns, each preserving evenings woven from ordinary kindness, shared laughter, steady friendship, patient devotion. The house, where every window glowed, remembered them all. And as Elias continued deeper into its endless corridors beside Mira, he carried with him a growing awareness that perhaps life's greatest treasures were not hidden within extraordinary moments alone, but within the quiet ways people cared for one another, especially when no one else was watching. Together, they walked onward through the warmth and wonder of the house, while somewhere behind them, a lullaby continued drifting softly through the nursery, guiding peaceful dreams beneath the watchful glow of moonlight. As Elias and Mira continued through the lantern-lit corridors of the house, the atmosphere around them shifted once more. The warmth remained, the quiet remained, yet something new drifted through the air. A scent, subtle at first, then unmistakable: vanilla, cinnamon, freshly baked apples. Elias glanced toward Mira. The elderly caretaker's eyes sparkled knowingly. "I wondered how long it would take before you noticed." Elias smiled faintly. "The house appears to have an excellent kitchen." Mira's soft laughter echoed gently through the hallway. "It has had many years of practice." Ahead, golden light spilled from beneath another doorway, unlike the rooms they had visited before. This one carried sounds, the rhythmic tapping of a wooden spoon against ceramic, the soft scrape of pastry dough being rolled across a floured surface, the gentle clinking of teacups arranged upon saucers. Mira rested her hand upon the door. "Some evenings," she said quietly, "are remembered through taste." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Taste?" Mira nodded. "Recipes passed through generations. Meals prepared with care. The comfort of being welcomed to someone's table." She opened the door. Warmth embraced them immediately. The kitchen beyond glowed beneath hanging copper lanterns. Shelves lined with ceramic dishes stretched along the walls. Bundles of herbs hung drying near broad windows, overlooking a moonlit orchard. A long wooden table occupied the center of the room. Its polished surface bore evidence of decades spent gathering people together. Several figures moved peacefully throughout the space. An elderly grandfather carefully sliced apples. A young woman kneaded dough beside him. Two children stood upon wooden stools, serious expressions upon their faces, as they attempted to follow instructions involving cinnamon and sugar. Every so often, someone laughed, not loudly, simply enough to brighten the room. Elias remained near the doorway, watching, listening. The grandfather handed one of the children a tiny pastry cutter shaped like a star. "Like this," he said patiently. "No rush." The child concentrated intensely, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. Eventually, a slightly crooked star emerged. The grandfather examined it carefully, then nodded with complete sincerity. "Perfect." The little girl beamed. Mira's expression softened beside Elias. "This recipe was never written down," she explained. "It existed here." She touched her heart lightly. "And here," her gaze shifted toward flower-covered hands, guiding smaller ones. "Some things are taught through presence." The young woman placed the finished pastries into the oven. Then, without ceremony, she wiped flour from the grandfather's sleeve. He pretended offense. She rolled her eyes affectionately. The children dissolved into giggles. No grand speech followed. No dramatic revelation. Only familiarity, ease. The quiet choreography developed by people who had spent years caring for one another. The scent of baking apples grew stronger, rich with cinnamon, warm enough to seem almost tangible. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Unexpected memories surfaced. Evenings spent reading beneath lantern light. Tea shared with companions encountered throughout the hidden library. Moments when food had offered more than nourishment. Moments when it had communicated belonging. He opened his eyes once more. "They are making memories," he said softly. Mira looked toward him. "No." A gentle smile touched her lips. They are living them. The distinction settled quietly within Elias. How often did people fail to recognize beauty while standing directly within it, waiting instead for future reflection to reveal its importance? The oven timer chimed softly. The children rushed forward with barely contained excitement. The grandfather intervened immediately. Patience, he advised kindly. The best things require cooling first. Disappointed sighs filled the kitchen, followed quickly by laughter. Fresh pastries eventually emerged onto cooling racks. Golden, fragrant, imperfect in the loveliest ways. The family gathered around the table. Tea was poured. Stories resumed. Outside, moonlight rested gently across the orchard beyond the windows. Inside, hands reached instinctively toward shared plates. The smallest child selected the most uneven pastry, then offered it proudly to the grandfather. "I made this one." He accepted it with appropriate reverence. "Then I have received the finest pastry in the house." The child glowed with pride. Elias noticed something then. No one within the room appeared hurried. Tasks unfolded naturally. Conversation wandered comfortably. Mistakes prompted laughter rather than criticism. It was not perfection that transformed the evening into something extraordinary. It was acceptance. Mira lowered her voice. Meals nourish the body, but being welcomed, her gaze drifted across the family gathered together, nourishes something deeper. The grandfather rose carefully from his chair, kettle in hand. Without asking, he refilled every teacup around the table, remembering precisely how each person preferred theirs. More honey, less milk, no sugar. Tiny acts performed so often they had become second nature. Elias watched thoughtfully. "Love remembers details," he observed. Mira smiled. "Indeed." Eventually, one by one, the family members leaned back in satisfied contentment. The pastries dwindled. Tea cooled. Conversation softened. Outside, the orchard shimmered beneath moonlight. The youngest child rested sleepily against her mother's shoulder. Flowers still dusted one small cheek. The grandfather reached across the table, adjusting the blanket draped around his wife's shoulders. Neither acknowledged the gesture. Neither needed to. Care had long since become instinct. Elias stood quietly. A profound tenderness settled within him. The house preserved these evenings, not because they were rare, but because people so often overlooked their significance. A pastry shared, tea prepared exactly as someone preferred, the certainty of having a place at the table. Mira stepped gently toward the doorway. "There are still many windows glowing tonight," she whispered. Elias glanced once more toward the family gathered together beneath lantern light, then nodded. Together, they returned to the quiet corridor beyond. The scent of cinnamon lingered faintly behind them. Lanterns illuminated their path ahead, and as they continued deeper into the house, where every window glowed, Elias carried with him another truth, that sometimes home revealed itself not through architecture or geography or permanence. Sometimes home was simply the feeling of being welcomed exactly as you were and invited to stay a little longer. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin not with grand destinations, but with the quiet decision to continue walking. The scent of cinnamon lingered faintly behind Elias and Mira as they stepped once more into the lantern-lit corridor. Warmth still clung gently to the air. A trace of baked apples, vanilla, fresh tea cooling within forgotten cups. For a moment, Elias found himself glancing back toward the kitchen door. Beyond it, laughter would continue. Pastries would disappear one by one from shared plates. Blankets would be adjusted around familiar shoulders. Small acts of care would unfold without announcement. Life continuing softly. Mira noticed his expression. "They'll be there for a little while longer," she said. Elias smiled. "It feels strange to leave." Mira's footsteps slowed. "Does it?" He considered the question carefully, then nodded yes. His gaze drifted toward the golden light beneath the kitchen doorway. Not because anything extraordinary happened. A thoughtful pause followed, but because it mattered. Mira's smile deepened. Those are often the hardest places to leave. Together, they resumed their gentle pace through the house. The corridor stretched quietly ahead. Floating lanterns illuminated polished wooden floors. Bookshelves occupied small alcoves along the walls. Their contents varied: collections of poetry, travel journals, pressed flower albums, recipe books softened with age, bundles of handwritten letters tied carefully with ribbon. Elias slowed near one shelf. His fingertips hovered above a weathered blue volume. The title had nearly faded. Asterisk asterisk for rainy afternoons. Asterisk asterisk. He glanced toward Mira. Do these belong to the house? Mira tilted her head thoughtfully. In a way. She adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. Many were left behind by those who stayed for a while. Her gaze lingered upon the worn spine of a gardening journal. Others simply appeared where they were needed. Elias looked back toward the shelf. As books often do, a quiet laugh escaped Mira. You've spent time within the hidden library. I imagine that possibility troubles you less than it troubles most. Elias smiled faintly. only because I stopped asking whether certain places should exist and started appreciating that they do. The house seemed to approve. At least, that was how it felt. Lantern flames brightened ever so slightly overhead, as though warmed by recognition. Ahead, the corridor curved gently toward a staircase Elias had not previously noticed. Unlike the grand staircases below, this one appeared more intimate. Its banister had been polished smooth by countless passing hands. Soft runners lined each wooden step. A small lantern rested upon the first stair. Waiting patiently, Mira paused beside it. "There are still many windows glowing tonight," she said, "but the upper floors are quieter." Elias glanced upward. The staircase disappeared into soft golden shadows. Do fewer visitors wander there? Mira rested her hand lightly against the banister. Sometimes her voice softened, and sometimes people simply need quieter kinds of comfort. They began to climb. Step by measured step, the house shifted around them. Not dramatically, not suddenly. The lower levels had carried warmth through shared conversation. The clinking of teacups, the turning of pages, the gentle rhythm of occupied spaces. Here, the quiet deepened, like snowfall settling over familiar rooftops. Lantern light grew softer. Footsteps became gentler. Even the air itself seemed calmer. Elias noticed another change. Time, or at least the feeling of it, appeared different. Not slower, not faster, merely less urgent, as though clocks had agreed to loosen their grip. Several steps above him, Mira glanced over her shoulder. "You noticed?" Elias nodded. "The house feels different here." "It does." She turned forward once more. The upper corridors tend to encourage reflection. A thoughtful silence followed. Elias adjusted the strap of his satchel. Was that intentional? Mira considered, perhaps. Her smile returned. Or perhaps people naturally climb higher when they are ready to sit quietly with themselves. Above them, another lantern flickered to life. Its glow cast moving patterns across the walls. Moon phases, stars, branches swaying in unseen breezes. The staircase eventually opened onto another hallway. This corridor differed from those below. Broad windows lined one side. Beyond them, moonlight rested upon gardens Elias had not noticed from outside. Silver pathways curved between flowering hedges. Stone benches sat beneath ancient trees. Tiny lanterns floated lazily above quiet ponds. The house, it seemed, possessed far more space within than the world beyond should reasonably allow. Elias had long ago learned not to argue with places that understood magic better than he did. Still, wonder stirred within him. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Mira followed his gaze. Yes. No elaborate explanation followed. None seemed necessary. Together, they continued. The corridor held its own collection of discoveries. A chessboard positioned beside a pair of armchairs. One match paused midway through completion. A basket of unfinished knitting, accompanied by neatly folded instructions. Fresh flowers arranged carefully within painted ceramic vases. A tray bearing 2 untouched cups of tea. Steam no longer rose from them, yet they somehow remained warm. Elias slowed beside the chessboard. Do people return for these? Mira adjusted a flower stem that had tilted slightly. Sometimes, and when they don't. She looked toward the half-finished game. The house remembers where they left off. Elias studied the board. One player had sacrificed a knight. An unexpected move. He wondered briefly whether they had eventually won, or whether the joy had rested entirely within the playing itself. Mira resumed walking. The house has never been particularly concerned with conclusions. Elias joined her. What does concern it? The answer arrived after several thoughtful steps. Presence. Her voice barely rose above the hush surrounding them. Being where you are. Moonlight filtered through broad windows. Silver and gold intertwined across polished floors. Elias considered the many rooms he had visited. The winter stories, the conservatory, the cinnamon kitchen, people reading, gardening, baking, listening. None had sought perfection. None had attempted greatness. They had simply been there, present. A grandfather teaching pastry techniques to small, flower-covered hands. Someone turning pages beside a fire. Friends pausing to admire flowers blooming at sunset. Ordinary evenings. Extraordinary attention. A distant sound drifted softly through the corridor. Music. Not performance, practice. A piano melody unfolding somewhere beyond closed doors. Gentle, patient. Someone repeating a difficult section until familiarity transformed effort into ease. Elias listened. The melody stumbled, restarted, improved. He smiled. They are getting better. Mira's eyes sparkled. Practice has a way of rewarding persistence. The melody continued, unhurried, human, real. As they walked onward, another sound joined it. The quiet ticking of clocks. Different rhythms, different tones, yet none alarming, none demanding. They simply existed, marking moments, not stealing them. Eventually, Elias glanced toward Mira. The question had been gathering quietly within him for some time now. Patient, respectful, waiting, he studied the elderly caretaker walking beside him. The softness within her expression, the familiarity with which she moved through the house, the affection evident in every explanation she offered. "You've shown me so much tonight," he said. Mira looked toward him. Her smile invited honesty. The winter stories, the conservatory, the kitchen. Elias hesitated, then continued. "You speak of these places with such understanding." A lantern overhead swayed gently. As though listening, he met Mira's gaze. "But what about you?" For perhaps the first time that evening, Mira did not answer immediately. Her footsteps slowed. Moonlight brushed silver strands within her hair. The corridor stretched quietly ahead, filled with lanterns, windows, the distant melody of practiced piano notes. Elias waited, without expectation, without urgency. Eventually, Mira's gaze drifted toward the moonlit gardens beyond the glass. "That," she said softly, "is a very thoughtful question." And together, they continued deeper into the upper corridors of the house, where every window glowed, toward an answer Elias had not realized he had been seeking all along. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The upper corridors of the house seemed to understand the value of silence. Not emptiness, not absence, but the kind of silence that allowed thoughts to settle gently, like snowflakes finding their place upon familiar ground. Mira continued walking beside Elias. Her pace remained unhurried, steady, comfortable. The distant piano melody had softened now, its notes drifting through the house like remembered lullabies. Outside the broad windows, moonlight silvered the gardens below. Tiny lanterns floated lazily above quiet ponds. Their reflections shimmered across still water. Elias found himself wondering how many evenings this house had witnessed, how many conversations had unfolded within these corridors, how many quiet kindnesses had been offered beneath lantern light. Eventually, Mira spoke. "There is a curious habit people have," she said softly. Elias glanced toward her. "They assume that the moments which shape their lives will announce themselves." Her fingers brushed lightly against the polished banister as they walked. They expect certainty, music swelling in the background, a grand realization, an unmistakable understanding that this, she gestured gently around them, matters. A knowing smile touched Elias's lips. "And does it happen that way?" Mira's laughter arrived softly, warm as wool blankets fresh from the hearth. "Rarely." Ahead, the corridor widened. A pair of armchairs rested beside another moonlit window. Between them stood a small table. Upon it sat an unfinished jigsaw puzzle, thousands of tiny pieces, most already assembled. A cottage beside a lake, autumn leaves reflected in calm waters. Only the sky remained incomplete. Elias slowed. Someone had organized the remaining pieces by color, patiently, carefully, as though fully intending to return. They never finished it. Mira paused beside him. Perhaps they did. Elias studied the puzzle, the missing sky, the empty spaces, waiting quietly for completion. I don't understand. Mira adjusted one of the nearby cushions. Sometimes finishing isn't the point. Her gaze drifted toward the puzzle, the conversations shared while searching for the right pieces, the tea that grew cold beside patient hands, the comfortable companionship of sitting near someone without needing constant words. She looked toward Elias. The evening may have fulfilled its purpose long before the puzzle was complete. He considered this. How often had people measured success by conclusions, while overlooking the beauty found within the process itself? Together, they resumed their walk. The corridor curved gently. More lanterns glowed overhead. Their golden light mingled with the moonlight pouring through tall windows. Somewhere nearby, rain began to fall. Elias slowed. He listened carefully, soft droplets tapping against glass, the distant rumble of approaching thunder. He turned toward the nearest window. Beyond it, the gardens remained dry beneath clear starlight. Confusion flickered briefly across his expression. The rain. Mira's smile widened. Not every sound belongs to the room you're standing in. The explanation arrived without explanation, as many truths within the house seemed to. The rainfall continued, gentle, steady, comforting, like evenings spent beneath blankets, while storms wandered safely beyond familiar walls. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Listening, there had always been something reassuring about rain heard from shelter. A reminder that warmth existed, that safety existed, that home, in whatever form it arrived, existed. When he opened his eyes once more, Mira was watching him kindly. You remembered something. Elias exhaled softly. Perhaps. Neither pressed further. The house appeared to appreciate unanswered questions. Ahead, another alcove emerged. Bookshelves climbed from floor to ceiling. A rolling ladder rested nearby, its brass rails polished by years of use. An elderly gentleman sat within a high-backed chair, spectacles balanced precariously upon the end of his nose. An open novel rested in his lap. He had fallen asleep mid-chapter. The fire crackling beside him had burned low. A knitted blanket covered his knees. Elias lowered his voice instinctively. Should we wake him? Mira's gaze softened. No. She adjusted the blanket slightly higher upon the man's shoulders. He looks comfortable. The gentleman sighed contentedly in his sleep, turning another page without opening his eyes. Elias smiled. I don't believe I've ever witnessed someone reading quite so enthusiastically. Mira's eyes twinkled. He insists he is merely resting them. Together, they moved onward. The corridor grew quieter still. Their footsteps softened against thick woven runners. Lantern light dimmed to a golden hush. Eventually, Mira stopped beside one final staircase, smaller than the last, narrower. Its wooden steps curved gently upward. Only a single lantern waited at its base, its flame steady, patient, as though it had been expecting them. Elias looked upward. The staircase disappeared into soft shadows. Beyond them, another level of the house waited. Mira rested her hand lightly upon the banister. For a long moment, she remained still, not hesitant, merely thoughtful. Elias waited beside her, without urgency. Finally, she spoke. You asked about me. Her voice had become quieter somehow, more delicate, as though handling something precious. I've spent many years introducing visitors to the house, explaining its windows, its rooms, the comforts it preserves. The lantern beside them flickered gently, but very few people remember to ask whether the house has cared for those who care for others. Elias met her gaze, warm brown eyes reflecting lantern light. You deserve comfort too. The words arrived simply, without performance, without obligation. Mira blinked slowly, as though receiving something unexpectedly kind. A small smile touched her lips. That is a lovely thing to say. Silence settled between them once more, comfortable, unforced. At last, Mira looked toward the staircase. I believe, she said softly, there is somewhere I would like to show you. She placed one foot upon the first step, then paused. A thoughtful expression crossed her face. When people imagine the moments that define a life, she began, they often picture extraordinary things, celebrations, milestones, great adventures. Her gaze lifted toward the lantern-lit shadows above. But I have found, her smile returned, that the evenings we carry closest to our hearts are often much quieter. Elias followed beside her, step by gentle step, upward, toward a part of the house few had seen. The air changed once more, not colder, not warmer, simply softer. The scent of lavender drifted faintly through the corridor above. Somewhere nearby, A clock chimed the half hour, unhurried, unconcerned, as though reminding the house itself that there was no need to rush. At the top of the staircase, Mira paused. One final hallway stretched before them, smaller than those below, more intimate. Its lanterns glowed with quiet amber light. Framed paintings lined the walls. Rainy streets, garden gates, books left open upon windowsills, moonlit cottages nestled among wildflowers. At the very end of the corridor, a single door waited, simple, unadorned. Warm light shone beneath it. Mira stood very still, her fingers resting lightly upon the brass handle. For the first time that evening, Elias sensed something new within her expression. Not sadness, not fear, something gentler, reverence, as though standing at the threshold of a beloved memory. The house remained silent around them. Lantern flames swayed softly overhead. Outside, the moon continued its patient journey across the sky. Mira turned toward Elias. Her smile carried all the warmth of tea shared during rainstorms, all the comfort of well-loved stories read beneath blankets, all the tenderness of familiar voices calling someone home. "I think," she said quietly, "I'm ready to show you my window." The brass handle turned beneath Mira's gentle touch. The door opened without a sound. Warmth greeted them immediately, not the lively warmth of bustling kitchens, nor the communal comfort of shared conservatories. This warmth felt quieter, more intimate, like stepping into an evening that had been waiting patiently to be remembered. Elias followed Mira inside. The room beyond was modest in size. A sitting room, nothing grand, nothing extraordinary. A well-loved armchair rested beside a stone fireplace. Books occupied shelves built into the walls. A small wooden table stood between two chairs. A half-finished scarf lay draped across its polished surface. The yarn remained attached to knitting needles, resting carefully beside it. A kettle sat near the hearth. Steam curled lazily from its spout, as though someone had only just prepared tea moments ago. Rain tapped gently against broad bay windows, overlooking a quiet garden. Beyond the glass, the world had softened beneath silver mist. Flowers bowed beneath droplets of rain. Lanterns glowed along winding garden paths. Their reflections shimmered across puddles, gathered among smooth stone walkways. Elias remained near the doorway, listening. The crackle of the fire, the rhythmic ticking of a nearby clock, the soothing cadence of rainfall. Everything existed in quiet harmony. Mira stepped slowly into the room. Her expression had changed, not dramatically, but but enough for Elias to notice. The house's caretaker, the gentle guide who had moved through every corridor with steady confidence, now seemed almost younger somehow, softer, more vulnerable. She approached the fireplace, running her fingertips lightly along the mantel. A framed photograph rested there, its edges worn smooth with time. Elias did not attempt to examine it. Some moments deserved invitation, not intrusion. Mira smiled faintly. It always smelled of rain. Her voice carried warmth, wrapped carefully around old affection. Our little house. She glanced toward the windows. The roof leaked during particularly determined storms. A quiet laugh escaped her. My father insisted he had repaired it properly each autumn and each spring. She tilted her head thoughtfully. The rain politely disagreed. Elias smiled. The fire crackled softly. Mira moved toward the bookshelf. Her fingers drifted across familiar spines. He read every evening. She selected one volume carefully, turning it over within her hands. History, poetry, travel journals. It hardly mattered. Her smile widened slightly. He loved stories simply because they allowed him to spend time in places he had never seen. The rain continued beyond the windows, gentle, patient. Mira returned the book to its place. My mother preferred practical things. She glanced toward the knitting resting upon the table. She believed idle hands often invited unnecessary worrying. Elias followed her gaze. The scarf. Mira nodded, always. A fondness settled within her expression. There was always another scarf, another blanket, another pair of mittens, as though the entire village might freeze unexpectedly if she paused for even a week. Elias laughed quietly. And did they? Mira considered. No. A thoughtful pause followed, but they remained wonderfully prepared. Together, they moved deeper into the room. The kettle whistled softly. Mira reached toward it instinctively, pouring tea into waiting cups. Her movements required no consideration. Memory guided them effortlessly. She offered one cup to Elias. He accepted it carefully. The scent of chamomile drifted upward, subtle hints of honey lingering beneath the steam. They argued sometimes, Mira said. Elias glanced toward her. About important things. Mira settled into one of the nearby armchairs. The proper way to prune rose bushes. The correct amount of cinnamon in apple cake. Whether books should ever be folded at the corners. Her eyes sparkled. My father believed such markings demonstrated affection. My mother regarded them as evidence of poor upbringing. Elias cradled his teacup. What conclusion did they reach? Mira's smile softened. They remained married for 48 years. Outside, rain traced silver pathways across the windows. Within the sitting room, the fire continued its patient dance. Elias observed the space around him. No grand celebrations filled the memory. No extraordinary accomplishments. No dramatic turning points. Only tea, rain, books, knitting, conversation, comfort. His gaze drifted toward Mira. You chose this evening. Mira lowered her eyes toward the tea resting within her hands. Yes. The answer arrived softly, certain. Elias waited. Eventually, she continued. I could have preserved birthdays, graduations, the day I first arrived at the house. The fire crackled nearby, but when I think of what sustained me throughout my life, her voice grew quieter. It was this. She lifted her gaze toward the rain-streaked windows. Ordinary evenings. My father reading beside the fire. My mother knitting while pretending not to listen. Tea growing cold because conversation had become more interesting. The room settled around them, gentle, safe. Mira smiled. We rarely recognize the importance of such moments while living them. We assume there will always be another rainy evening, another chapter, another cup of tea. The clock upon the mantel ticked onward, steady, unhurried. Elias looked into the dancing firelight, thinking of all the places he had wandered, the countless roads he had traveled, the companions he had known briefly, the moments he had cherished without understanding why. They sound wonderful, he said quietly. Mira's eyes glistened within the lantern light. They were. Rain continued its lullaby beyond the windows. The kettle remained warm. The scarf awaited completion. The fire cast golden patterns upon familiar walls. For a long while, neither spoke. There was no need. Sometimes, understanding arrived not through explanation, but through shared stillness. Eventually, Mira set her empty teacup upon the table. A thoughtful expression settled across her features. Tell me, Elias. Her voice remained gentle. If you could preserve one evening forever. She looked toward him kindly. Which would you choose? Elias lowered his gaze toward the amber surface of the tea, resting within his cup. The rain continued beyond the windows, steady, gentle, patient. He considered Mira's question carefully. If you could preserve one evening forever, which would you choose? The answer did not arrive immediately. Instead, memories surfaced quietly. Lantern-lit corridors within the hidden library. Conversations shared beside ancient shelves. Journeys undertaken beneath unfamiliar skies. People encountered briefly, yet remembered long afterward. He thought of laughter echoing through unexpected places, of letters written beneath starlight, of stories exchanged while storms passed safely outside. So many moments, so many evenings, each carrying its own kind of beauty. "I don't know," he admitted softly. Mira's expression remained warm. "There is no hurry." Elias glanced toward the rain-kissed windows. "I think," he hesitated, "perhaps I have spent so much time moving forward that I never considered whether there were moments worth remaining within." The fire crackled softly nearby. Mira folded her hands within her lap. "We are often encouraged to chase what comes next, the next achievement, the next destination, the next version of ourselves." Her gaze drifted toward the half-finished scarf resting upon the table. "But there is quiet wisdom in pausing long enough to appreciate what already exists." The clock upon the mantel chimed softly, marking another passing hour, neither urgent nor mournful, simply present. Elias looked around the room once more. The books, the knitting, the fire, the tea, the rain. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, he understood why Mira had chosen this evening. Because love had lived here, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, in shared routines, in remembered preferences, in blankets draped across sleeping shoulders, in repaired roofs that continue to leak each spring, in cinnamon debates and dog-eared books. The smallest acts, repeated faithfully over years. "They loved each other very much," he said. Mira smiled. "They did." A thoughtful silence settled between them. "My parents were imperfect people." The admission arrived without sadness. "My father misplaced important documents with astonishing regularity. My mother occasionally watered plants that did not require watering." Elias smiled faintly. "They sound wonderfully human." Mira laughed softly. "They were." Her expression gentled. "They made mistakes. They grew impatient. They worried about ordinary things. But they kept choosing kindness." The rain intensified briefly against the windows, then softened once more. "My father once told me," Mira began quietly, "that love is less about grand declarations and more about learning another person's favorite way to drink their tea." Elias glanced toward the cup in his hands. Camomile's honey, prepared exactly as Mira remembered. "He sounds wise." He forgot where he left his spectacles at least twice a day. Mira's eyes sparkled, but yes, he was very wise. The firelight danced across familiar walls. Outside, the gardens shimmered beneath rainfall and moonlight. Elias leaned back within his chair, his thoughts drifting. Perhaps He realized the house had never been preserving perfection. It had been preserving attention. The moments people chose to truly notice one another. A child proudly offering an uneven pastry. A husband adjusting his wife's blanket without being asked. A gardener pausing to admire a newly opened bloom. A mother knitting warmth into every stitch. Ordinary evenings, extraordinary presents. Mira rose slowly from her chair, carrying empty teacups toward the small kitchen, tucked discreetly into one corner of the room. Elias watched as she rinsed each cup, her movements familiar, practiced, comfortable. You visited this memory often. Mira dried her hands thoughtfully. Only when I need reminding. Of what? She returned to the fireplace, settling once more into her chair. That joy does not always arrive accompanied by celebration. Her voice softened. Sometimes it arrives quietly, as rain tapping against windows, as someone asking whether you would like another cup of tea, as the certainty that you need not earn your place at the table. The words settled gently within Elias. He thought of all the people who moved through life, believing they must constantly prove themselves worthy of belonging. How exhausting that must be. Mira studied the dancing firelight. My parents never asked me to become extraordinary. They simply hoped I would become kind. A tear glimmered briefly at the corner of her eye, not born from grief, but gratitude. They gave me that. The house remained still around them, as though honoring the truth of her words. Elias looked toward the rain-streaked windows, then back toward Mira. I think, he said carefully, that may be one of the most extraordinary gifts a person can receive. Mira's smile returned, soft and sincere. I believe you're right. Outside, the rain gradually eased, droplets clinging to petals and garden stones. Moonlight emerged once more between retreating clouds, silver illuminating winding pathways below. The clock ticked onward. The fire burned lower. Tea cooled within forgotten cups, and within the quiet sitting room, two companions rested comfortably in the presence of an ordinary evening that had shaped an extraordinary life. Eventually, Mira looked toward the windows. It grows late. Her voice carried gentle reluctance. Elias followed her gaze. It does. She stood carefully, smoothing invisible creases from her cardigan. But there are still windows glowing tonight. A familiar warmth returned to her expression. The caretaker once more, though something had changed, not within Mira, but within Elias's understanding of her. She had not simply guided others toward comfort. She had carried her own cherished evenings carefully through the years, drawing strength from their memory, offering that same comfort freely to those who wandered through the house. Mira moved toward the door, then paused without turning around. "There is something else I would like to show you." Elias rose from his chair, setting his empty teacup carefully upon the table. "What is it?" The rain-sweet air drifted softly through the room. Mira glanced over her shoulder, her eyes reflecting firelight and moonlight alike. "A window that does not belong to the past." The house seemed to inhale quietly around them, lanterns brightening beyond the doorway, as though preparing for whatever waited next. Elias felt curiosity stir gently within him, not hurried, not demanding, simply present. He joined Mira near the threshold. Together, they stepped away from the warmth of the rainy evening, leaving the fire crackling softly behind them, the scarf awaiting completion, the books resting patiently upon familiar shelves, and the memory of two ordinary people whose quiet kindness had echoed far beyond the walls of their little home. The door closed gently behind them, and once again, Elias and Mira continued deeper into the house, where every window glowed. The corridor beyond Mira's window welcomed them with familiar lantern light. Yet something had shifted, not within the house, but within Elias. He walked in thoughtful silence beside Mira. The scent of rain still lingered faintly in the air, as though traces of the evening they had just visited had chosen to accompany them a little farther. Neither hurried. The house had never encouraged haste. Ahead, the corridor curved gently toward another series of tall windows. Moonlight pooled across polished wooden floors, painting silver pathways between pools of golden lantern light. Elias glanced toward Mira. "You said there was another window." Mira nodded. "There is." Her expression held a quiet thoughtfulness. "But this one is different." They continued walking. A grandfather clock stood patiently within a nearby alcove. Its pendulum moved with steady certainty. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second arriving precisely as intended, without urgency, without delay. Elias found himself slowing beside it. "It's strange." Mira tilted her head. "What is?" "The house preserves moments." His gaze drifted toward the clock. "And yet, it never feels trapped in time." Mira's smile returned. "Because preserving something is not the same as refusing to move forward." She rested her fingertips lightly against the polished wood of the clock. Memories become burdens when we insist on living within them forever. Her eyes softened, but they become gifts when they remind us how to live more fully in the present. The pendulum continued its gentle rhythm. Elias considered her words carefully. Perhaps that was why Mira's rainy evening had carried such comfort, not because she wished to return permanently, but because remembering it reminded her of what mattered. They resumed their walk. The corridor gradually narrowed, its atmosphere becoming quieter still. Lanterns glowed softly within wall sconces shaped like blooming flowers. Fresh lavender rested in ceramic vases, placed thoughtfully upon nearby tables. The fragrance drifted through the air, subtle, calming. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime stirred. Its delicate melody carried through the house like whispered music. Elias listened. It sounds different here. It does. Mira's gaze lingered ahead. The house changes according to what is needed. They passed another doorway, slightly ajar within. Moonlight illuminated shelves filled with unfinished journals, blank pages waiting patiently beside fountain pens. Elias slowed. Whose are these? Mira glanced inside. They belong to those who have not yet finished becoming who they are. A thoughtful silence followed. Elias looked toward the empty pages. Their quiet possibility. There is something comforting about that. Mira smiled. Isn't there? Life rarely arrives with completed instructions. They continued onward. At the end of the corridor, another window waited. Unlike the others Elias had encountered throughout the house, this one remained dark. No golden glow illuminated its curtains. No familiar memory unfolded beyond the glass. Instead, the window reflected only moonlight and themselves. Mira stopped before it. For several moments, she simply stood there, hands folded gently before her. Elias waited, without questions, without assumptions. Eventually, Mira spoke. Many visitors believe the house exists solely to preserve what has already happened. Her reflection shimmered softly within the dark glass, but that has never been entirely true. Elias stepped closer. The window reflected lantern light dancing behind them. What do you mean? Mira turned toward him. Her expression held both tenderness and wonder. The past shapes us. It teaches us. It comforts us. But life, she looked once more toward the dark window, still asks us to participate in what comes next. Elias studied the glass. Nothing appeared beyond it. Only possibility. This window hasn't happened yet. The realization arrived quietly. Mira nodded. It belongs to tomorrow. The house settled around them, lantern flames swaying gently overhead. Outside, the moon continued its patient journey through the night sky. Elias found himself unexpectedly moved. People often feared uncertainty, the unwritten chapters, the unanswered questions, the future. Yet standing here, within a house devoted to comfort, the unknown no longer seemed frightening, only open, full of potential. What will appear there? Mira's smile deepened. That depends on what? Her eyes reflected both wisdom and warmth. On the choices people make, the kindness they offer, the evenings they create, the moments they choose to notice while living them. Elias looked toward the dark window once more. Perhaps tomorrow's glowing windows were being built constantly, in cups of tea shared between friends, in bedtime stories read aloud, in messages sent simply to ask whether someone had arrived home safely. Ordinary gestures, quietly shaping extraordinary futures. The reflection staring back at him seemed different somehow, not because he had changed entirely, but because understanding had deepened. Beside him, Mira adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. There is something hopeful about unfinished stories. Elias smiled faintly. Because they aren't over yet. Exactly. The dark window shimmered softly beneath moonlight, waiting, patient, as though understanding that some answers required time. Mira looked toward Elias. You have spent much of your life wandering. He nodded. I have. And has it brought you what you hoped to find? The question settled gently between them. Elias considered. The truth. Mira's eyes sparkled kindly. The truth is usually a good place to begin. A quiet breath escaped him. Sometimes he glanced toward the window, and sometimes I think I was searching for something without understanding what it was. Mira remained silent, allowing space for honesty. Elias lowered his gaze thoughtfully. I thought perhaps there would be one destination, one answer, one place where everything finally made sense. Moonlight silvered the floor around them. But maybe a small smile touched his lips. Maybe life is less about finding one perfect place and more about learning to recognize moments worth cherishing wherever we happen to be. Mira's expression softened with unmistakable pride. I believe the house would approve of that conclusion. For a while, they stood together before tomorrow's window, watching moonlight dance across unwritten possibilities, neither eager to predict what came next, neither fearful of what remained unknown, content simply to acknowledge that beautiful evenings still awaited their turn to glow. Eventually, Mira turned toward the corridor stretching beyond. Come. Her voice remained warm. There is one final place I think you should see before dawn arrives. Elias followed beside her, lanterns brightening softly as they passed. The dark window remained behind, reflecting moonlight, reflecting hope, reflecting the quiet certainty that some of life's most meaningful chapters had yet to be written. Together, they continued onward through the house, toward whatever waited within its final glowing windows. The corridor grew quieter as Elias and Mira continued onward. The house seemed to sense the approaching hour before dawn. Lantern flames softened. Shadows stretched gently along familiar walls. Outside, the moon had begun its slow descent toward the horizon. Elias walked beside Mira in thoughtful silence. Tomorrow's window lingered within his mind, unwritten, hopeful, waiting ahead. The corridor opened into a small observatory tucked beneath the highest reaches of the house. Tall windows curved overhead. The night sky spread beyond them in endless shades of deep blue. Stars shimmered quietly above sleeping gardens. A telescope rested near the center of the room. Beside it, a pair of comfortable chairs faced the eastern horizon. A knitted blanket had been folded neatly across one armrest, as though someone had anticipated company. Mira stepped inside. The house has always been rather fond of dawn. Elias followed. The house notices dawn. Mira smiled. The house notices many things. She moved toward the windows. People celebrate beginnings with remarkable enthusiasm. Birthdays, new homes, journeys, but quieter beginnings. Her gaze lifted toward the stars, often pass unnoticed. Elias settled into one of the nearby chairs. The beginning of what? Mira lowered herself into the chair beside him. Forgiveness, understanding, choosing to try again. The observatory settled around them, still, peaceful. Somewhere below, a clock chimed softly. The house breathed with the steady rhythm of sleeping places. Elias wrapped the blanket loosely across his knees. Its warmth surprised him. You've brought many people here. Mira nodded. A few. And what do they usually ask? Mira considered. They ask whether happiness lasts. The stars reflected within the observatory windows. And what do you tell them? A gentle laugh escaped Mira. I tell them happiness was never meant to be permanent. Elias glanced toward her. That sounds rather discouraging. It isn't. Her smile softened. Storms pass. Seasons change. Children grow older. Books eventually reach their final pages. She looked toward the eastern horizon. That is precisely what makes beautiful moments worthy of our attention. Elias followed her gaze. A faint silver glow had begun to gather at the edge of the world, the earliest suggestion of dawn. If evenings lasted forever, Mira continued quietly, we might forget to treasure them. Silence settled comfortably between them, the kind shared between people who no longer felt compelled to fill every pause. Elias thought about winter stories, gardens, cinnamon pastries, rainy evenings, tomorrow's unwritten window. The house had offered many truths throughout the night, none arriving dramatically, all arriving gently. He looked toward Mira. I think I understand now. Mira tilted her head. What do you understand? Elias searched carefully for the right words. People spend so much time waiting for extraordinary lives that they overlook extraordinary moments hidden within ordinary ones. Moonlight rested softly across the observatory floor. Mira's eyes brightened. That is very well said. Elias smiled faintly. I had an excellent teacher. A blush touched Mira's cheeks. Nonsense. The first birdsong drifted faintly through the windows. Soft, tentative, morning preparing to announce itself. The eastern sky shifted gradually from midnight blue toward gentler shades. Lavender, rose, gold. Elias leaned back within his chair, watching colors bloom across the horizon. When I leave, the question lingered uncertainly. Mira looked toward him kindly. When you leave, will I remember all of this? The observatory remained quiet. Mira folded her hands within her lap. You may forget certain details. The exact arrangement of lanterns, the pattern upon someone's teacup, the number of steps between corridors. Her gaze returned to the dawn, but the feelings, a warm smile touched her lips. Those tend to find their way home. The answer settled gently within Elias, comforting, true. Outside, sunlight touched the highest branches of distant trees. Stars faded one by one, not disappearing, simply stepping aside, making room for another kind of beauty. Mira rose slowly from her chair. The blanket slipped neatly back into place. Dawn has arrived. Elias stood beside her. Golden light filtered through observatory windows, transforming moonlit silver into morning amber. For several moments, they simply stood together, watching the beginning of another day. No grand speeches followed, no dramatic revelations, only quiet gratitude. Eventually, Mira turned toward him. Thank you. Elias blinked. For what? Her smile held all the warmth of glowing windows. For noticing. He understood then. The house had never asked visitors to solve its mysteries, only to witness its wonders, to recognize kindness, to appreciate ordinary evenings, to remain present long enough for beauty to reveal itself. Elias looked once more toward the sunrise, then back toward Mira. "Thank you for showing me." The house seemed to brighten around them, lanterns glowing softly despite the growing daylight, as though pleased with the exchange. Together, they began the journey back through quiet corridors, past observatories, past tomorrow's window, past rainy evenings preserved with care. The house remained unchanged, yet Elias knew he would never walk through it quite the same way again, because somewhere between cinnamon kitchens and dawnlit observatories, he had discovered something unexpectedly precious. Not a destination, not an answer, but an invitation to notice, to cherish, to remain present within the ordinary evenings that so often shaped extraordinary lives. And as morning unfolded gently beyond every glowing window, the house carried that invitation forward, waiting patiently for whoever might wander through its doors next. As they descended through the quiet corridors of the house, morning light followed them gently. Golden rays filtered through tall windows, lanterns dimmed without ever fully surrendering their warmth. The house welcomed daylight with the same grace it had offered the night. Elias walked beside Mira. Neither rushed. Their footsteps settled into an easy rhythm, familiar now, comfortable. They passed the small sitting area where the unfinished puzzle still waited patiently. The remaining pieces rested neatly beside the board. The sky yet to be completed. Elias paused, then smiled. "I think they'll finish it." Mira glanced toward the cottage beside the lake. Perhaps. Her eyes sparkled. Or perhaps they'll discover that they already found what they came here for. Together, they continued onward. The distant scent of fresh bread drifted through the air. Someone, somewhere within the house, had already begun preparing breakfast. Birdsong echoed faintly through open windows. Rain-washed gardens shimmered beneath early sunlight. The world beyond the house had awakened, yet peace remained, as though the gentleness of the night had chosen to linger a little longer. Eventually, they arrived once more at the grand entrance hall. Morning light streamed through stained glass windows, painting the floor in soft shades of amber and rose. Elias turned slowly, taking in the sweeping staircase, the floating lanterns, the countless corridors leading toward unseen rooms, toward glowing windows, toward stories waiting patiently to be discovered. He felt different, not transformed entirely, simply steadier somehow, more aware. Mira adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. The house does not expect perfection from those who visit. Elias looked toward her. What does it expect? A gentle smile touched her lips. Very little. She considered thoughtfully, only that they pay attention. The answer settled quietly between them. Elias thought of cinnamon-covered pastries, blankets adjusted without being asked, rain against familiar windows, unfinished scarves, tomorrow's unwritten possibilities, dawn shared beside an observatory window, ordinary moments, extraordinary care. Outside, morning sunlight illuminated the garden paths leading away from the house. The front door stood slightly open, waiting, not urging, simply acknowledging that every visitor eventually continued their journey. Elias approached the doorway, then hesitated. He glanced back toward Mira. "Will I return?" Mira's expression softened. "The house has a curious habit." "What sort of habit?" "It often appears precisely when someone needs reminding." "Reminding of what?" Her gaze drifted toward the glowing windows above. "That home is not always a place. Sometimes," she said softly, "it is a collection of moments. The people who welcomed us, the kindness we received, the kindness we offered, the evenings we chose to notice before they slipped quietly into memory." Elias followed her gaze upward. The house stood bathed in morning light, every window reflecting gold. He smiled. "I think I understand." Mira nodded. "I believe you do." For several moments, they simply stood together near the open door, listening to birdsong drifting through the gardens, breathing in the scent of dew-covered roses, allowing gratitude to settle comfortably within the spaces words could not quite reach. Eventually, Elias adjusted the strap of his satchel. The familiar weight rested against his shoulder. He had arrived carrying questions. He now departed carrying something quieter, something gentler, an understanding that life rarely announced its most meaningful moments, that beauty often lived within repetition, within routine, within ordinary evenings shared with extraordinary care. Mira offered him a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper. Elias blinked. "What's this?" Her eyes twinkled. "A reminder." He accepted it carefully. Warmth lingered within the folded parcel. "What kind of reminder?" Mira's smile widened. "You'll discover that in your own time." Outside, sunlight danced across the garden paths. The world waited, full of unfinished stories, unwritten windows, future evenings yet to glow. Elias stepped through the doorway, then paused, turning once more toward the house, toward Mira, toward lanterns that still shimmered softly despite the morning light. "Thank you." The words carried sincerity, uncomplicated by grandeur. Mira placed one hand over her heart. "You are most welcome." The front door remained open behind him, not closing, never insisting upon final goodbyes, because some places understood that departures were merely pauses within longer journeys. Elias began walking down the garden path. Birdsong accompanied his footsteps. Morning sunlight warmed his shoulders. Behind him, the house, where every window glowed, stood quietly among blooming gardens, its windows shining gently beneath the dawn, waiting patiently, ready to welcome whoever might one day arrive seeking comfort, wonder, or simply the reassurance that ordinary evenings could hold extraordinary grace. And somewhere within its lantern-lit corridors, tea continued to steep. Books waited to be opened. Scarves awaited their final stitches. Pastries cooled upon kitchen counters. Puzzles rested unfinished. Tomorrow's windows remained unwritten. Life, in all its quiet beauty, continued as it always had, as it always would. And with each step forward, Elias carried the house with him, not within memory alone, but within the choices he would make, the kindness he would offer, the moments he would choose to notice. For perhaps the truest purpose of glowing windows was never simply to illuminate the past, but to teach us how to bring light into the evenings still waiting ahead. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the grand entrance hall. The house welcomed the day with quiet grace. Lanterns still glowed softly overhead, their golden warmth blending effortlessly with the pale amber light drifting through stained glass windows. Elias stood near the open doorway. The gardens beyond shimmered beneath the freshness of dawn. Birdsong carried upon the morning breeze. The scent of dew-covered roses lingered in the air. Beside him, Mira adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. For several moments, neither spoke. There was no discomfort within the silence, only understanding, the kind that arrives after long conversations shared without urgency. Elias looked down at the small parcel resting carefully within his hands. Brown paper, simple twine. Nothing about it suggested rarity. Nothing about it demanded attention. And yet, Mira had offered it with unmistakable care. He glanced toward her. "You mentioned this was a reminder." Mira's smile softened. "I did." Elias turned the package over thoughtfully. The paper carried the faint scent of lavender and old books. The twine had been tied with practiced precision. He hesitated, then looked back toward Mira. "May I open it now?" Warmth brightened her expression. "Of course." Carefully, Elias loosened the twine. The knot yielded easily beneath patient fingers. The paper unfolded with a gentle rustle. Within it rested a journal, Its leather cover had deepened with age into rich shades of chestnut brown. No title adorned its surface. No elaborate decoration framed its edges. Only simplicity. Only possibility. Elias ran his fingertips across the worn leather. The journal felt familiar somehow, as though it had spent years waiting quietly upon a shelf, ready for the right hands. He opened it slowly. Blank pages greeted him, cream-colored, untouched. The scent of paper and ink drifted upward. A promise, an invitation. Upon the first page, a single sentence had been written in elegant handwriting. Elias read the words silently, then once more slowly this time. Some evenings deserve to be noticed before they become memories. The entrance hall settled around him. Birdsong continued beyond the open door. Lanterns flickered gently overhead. He lifted his gaze toward Mira. This isn't magical. A quiet laugh escaped her. No. She folded her hands comfortably before her. It isn't. Elias glanced down toward the journal once more. Blank pages stretched patiently before him. Then why does it feel important? Mira stepped closer. The morning light softened the silver strands woven through her hair. Because the house preserves glowing windows, her gaze drifted upward toward the countless corridors beyond. The world beyond these walls asks something different. Elias listened carefully. It asks us to notice them while we are still living them. The journal remained open within his hands, its unwritten pages carrying unexpected weight. People often believe meaningful moments announce themselves. Mira's smile held gentle understanding. They imagine certainty. They wait for milestones, for extraordinary achievements, for some unmistakable sign that tells them. She paused thoughtfully. This is important. Elias lowered his eyes toward the journal. The first page waited quietly, patiently, but life rarely works that way. Morning sunlight warmed the polished floors around them. Mira nodded. The evenings that sustain us often arrive disguised as ordinary days. Her voice softened. A conversation shared over tea. A walk through familiar gardens. A story read aloud beside a fire. The comfort of being welcomed exactly as we are. The words settled deeply within Elias. He thought of cinnamon pastries cooling upon kitchen counters, rain tapping against windows, blankets adjusted without ceremony, tomorrow's unwritten possibilities. The house had never celebrated perfection, only presence. He traced the sentence written upon the journal's first page once more. Some evenings deserve to be noticed before they become memories. What if we miss them? The question emerged quietly, honest human. Mira's expression remained kind. Most of us do. No judgment accompanied the admission, only compassion. We become busy, distracted, concerned with what comes next. She glanced toward the open doorway. The beautiful thing is that life rarely offers us only one opportunity. Elias looked toward her. There will be others. Mira nodded. There are always others. Outside, sunlight drifted across winding garden paths. Morning unfolded gently beyond the house. Unhurried, hopeful, Elias closed the journal carefully, holding it against his chest. It feels strange. What does? He smiled faintly. I've collected stories for so long. His fingertips brushed the journal's cover. But I've never considered preserving my own. Mira's eyes brightened. Perhaps because you believed you needed extraordinary adventures to justify doing so. Elias considered this, then laughed softly. I may have underestimated ordinary evenings. Warmth touched Mira's smile. Many people do. The house remained still around them. Lanterns glowing, birdsong drifting through open doors. The scent of roses carried upon the morning breeze. Within the grand entrance hall, between departures and beginnings, Elias stood holding a simple journal filled with empty pages. And for the very first time, emptiness no longer resembled absence. It resembled possibility. Elias remained standing near the open doorway. The journal rested comfortably within his hands. Morning sunlight spilled across its worn leather cover. Soft, golden, warm enough to suggest that perhaps some gifts required no ornamentation to reveal their value. Outside, the gardens shimmered beneath dew-kissed petals. Birdsong floated through the open entrance. The world had fully awakened now, yet the house remained unhurried, as though understanding that certain departures deserved gentleness. Mira moved toward one of the tall windows overlooking the eastern gardens. She stood quietly for a moment, watching sunlight gather among the roses. Eventually, she spoke. Do you know why the journal is empty? Elias glanced down toward the cream-colored pages. So I can fill it. A smile touched Mira's lips. Partly, she turned toward him, but also because no one else can decide which evenings matter most to you. The words settled thoughtfully between them. Elias looked once more at the journal. Its unwritten pages no longer seemed intimidating, only patient, waiting. I think I expected someone wiser to provide the answers. Mira's laughter arrived softly. My dear Elias, she adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. The wisest people I have known rarely offered answers. What did they offer instead? Questions. Her gaze returned to the gardens, the kind that invite us to pay closer attention. Elias considered this. Throughout his travels, he had sought knowledge, ancient maps, forgotten histories, stories preserved within the hidden library. Yet some of the most meaningful truths had arrived not through certainty, but through curiosity. Mira looked toward him kindly. "If you were to write about this morning," she gestured gently around them, "what would you notice?" Elias hesitated. Instinct urged him toward significance, toward grand observations worthy of preservation. But the house had taught him otherwise. He listened, birdsong drifting through open doors, the quiet crackle of lantern flames, the soft rustle of leaves stirring within the gardens. He looked. Sunlight painted amber patterns across polished floors. Dust motes danced through golden beams. Roses bowed beneath droplets of morning dew. He felt the reassuring weight of the journal within his hands, the tenderness of gratitude settling within his chest, the peaceful ache that often accompanied meaningful farewells. He smiled. "I would write about the birds." Mira's eyes brightened. "The birds, they sound happy." A thoughtful pause followed. "And I think," he glanced toward the gardens, "I would write about how strange it feels to leave somewhere without feeling as though I am losing it." Warmth deepened within Mira's expression. "That is beautifully said." Elias lowered his gaze toward the journal. "I think I understand now." Mira waited patiently. He searched carefully for the truth forming quietly within him. "The house never asked me to hold on to every moment forever." Sunlight continued to spill across the entrance hall. "It asked me to notice them while they were here." Mira nodded. "Exactly." A profound stillness settled between them. Not emptiness, recognition, the kind that arrived when understanding finally found its proper place. After a while, Elias looked toward Mira. "What will you do now?" The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, then smiled. "What I have always done." Her gaze drifted toward the countless corridors, extending beyond the entrance hall. There will be other visitors, other evenings requiring witness, other hearts seeking comfort. The house glowed gently around them, lanterns flickering softly beneath daylight. "Will you remember me?" Mira's smile widened. "I remember everyone who truly notices." Emotion tightened unexpectedly within Elias's throat. Not sadness, only gratitude. For cinnamon kitchens, rainy evenings, tomorrow's unwritten windows, dawn observatories, for the patient caretaker who had guided him through each of them. He opened the journal once more. The first page awaited him. Some evenings deserve to be noticed before they become memories. Turning carefully to the next page, he paused. The blankness no longer intimidated him. It welcomed him. What should I write first? Mira folded her hands comfortably before her. What would you like to remember? Elias thought carefully. The answer arrived quietly, without performance, without effort. I think. A small smile touched his lips. I would like to remember that ordinary things are often far more extraordinary than they first appear. Mira's eyes shimmered gently. I believe that is an excellent place to begin. Beyond the open doorway, the morning breeze carried the fragrance of roses into the house. The world waited patiently outside, full of unfinished conversations, unexpected kindnesses, tea shared between friends, evenings yet to glow. Elias closed the journal carefully, holding it close once more. His journeys through the hidden library had taught him the value of stories. The house had taught him something equally important: to become fully present within the story he was already living. For perhaps the most meaningful windows were not always those preserved behind glass. Perhaps they were the moments unfolding quietly around us each day, waiting not to be remembered, but first to be noticed. The morning breeze stirred gently through the open doorway, carrying with it the scent of roses, fresh earth, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. Elias stood beside Mira within the grand entrance hall. The journal rested securely beneath his arm. Its empty pages no longer represented uncertainty, only possibility. For several moments, neither moved, neither seemed eager to disturb the peace that had settled softly around them. Eventually, Mira glanced toward the gardens beyond the house. I believe, she said quietly, it may be time. Elias followed her gaze. Sunlight illuminated winding pathways lined with blooming flowers. Dew shimmered like scattered pearls upon blades of grass. Birds darted between branches, busy with the simple work of morning. The world outside continued as it always had, unaware that somewhere nearby, within a house where every window glowed, a farewell was unfolding with extraordinary tenderness. Elias adjusted the strap of his satchel. The familiar weight rested comfortably against his shoulder. Different now, not lighter, not heavier, simply understood. He turned toward Mira. Will the house miss me? The question arrived with a touch of self-conscious amusement. Mira's smile deepened. Oh, undoubtedly. Elias raised an eyebrow. The house itself, she considered thoughtfully. The house grows, rather fond of those who pay attention. Warm laughter found its way into Elias's voice. Then I should hope I made a favorable impression. I believe you did. Together, they stepped through the open doorway. Morning sunlight welcomed them immediately, warm against skin, still accustomed to lantern-lit corridors. The gardens stretched around them in quiet splendor. Stone pathways curved between flowering hedges. Benches rested beneath flowering trees. Tiny lanterns lingered among the branches, their soft glow fading gradually beneath the brightness of day. Elias slowed, taking it all in. The house stood behind them. Its countless windows reflected the golden hues of early morning. Somewhere within those walls, pastries would continue cooling upon kitchen counters. Books would wait patiently to be reopened. Blankets would be adjusted around sleeping shoulders. Puzzles would remain delightfully unfinished. Life would continue, gentle, steady, comforting. Mira folded her hands before her. Many people believe farewells must be sorrowful. Elias looked toward her. Don't they? Her expression softened. Not always. They continued walking slowly along the garden path. A meaningful goodbye, Mira said quietly, is often another way of expressing gratitude. The roses nodded softly in the morning breeze. Elias considered her words. He thought of all the departures he had experienced throughout his travels, how often people rushed through them, avoided them, feared them, perhaps because endings reminded us that beautiful things could not remain unchanged forever. Yet perhaps that very impermanence gave them value. I think, he began carefully, I'm grateful. Mira glanced toward him. For what? Elias smiled. For being reminded. Reminded of what? His gaze drifted toward the house. That life is happening now, not after I reach some distant destination. Not once every question has been answered. Not only during extraordinary adventures. He looked toward the sunlit gardens. It's here, in cups of tea, in shared stories, in mornings like this one. Emotion shimmered briefly within Mira's eyes. That is a beautiful understanding. They reached the garden gate, its wrought iron design intertwined with climbing roses. Beyond it, the path continued toward the wider world. Elias stopped, turning toward Mira fully. The house stood quietly behind her, windows glowing softly beneath the morning light. He searched for the appropriate words, finding none grand enough, perhaps because gratitude rarely required eloquence. Thank you, he said simply. Mira's smile carried the warmth of every lantern within the house. It has been my pleasure. Silence settled gently between them, comfortable, complete. At last, Mira reached forward, straightening the collar of Elias's dark blue cloak with familiar ease. The gesture startled him slightly, then warmed him unexpectedly. There, she stepped back. Much better. Elias laughed softly. You sound remarkably certain. I have years of experience. The morning breeze danced through the gardens, carrying birdsong through the flowering paths. Mira rested one hand lightly upon the gate. There is one final thing I would like you to remember. Elias waited. Her expression grew thoughtful, tender. When you encounter evenings that feel ordinary, she said softly, do not dismiss them too quickly. Some of life's greatest treasures arrive quietly, the way someone remembers exactly how you prefer your tea, the sound of familiar laughter drifting through another room, the comfort of returning home after a long day, the feeling of being welcomed exactly as you are. The house shimmered behind her, bathed in morning gold. Pay attention to those moments. Her smile returned. They often become the windows that glow most brightly. Elias felt the truth of her words settle deep within him. He placed one hand gently upon the journal tucked beneath his arm. I will. Mira nodded, content, as though no further promises were necessary. For several heartbeats, they simply stood together beside the garden gate, two companions at the meeting point between endings and beginnings. Then, with one final glance toward the house where every window glowed, Elias stepped through the gate onto the path waiting beyond. The garden gate closed softly behind him, not with finality, only with gentleness. Elias continued along the winding path beyond the house. Morning sunlight filtered through arching branches overhead. The world stretched before him, familiar in some ways, entirely new in others. He walked slowly, not because he hesitated, but because he had learned the value of noticing. Birdsong drifted between the trees. A squirrel darted across the path ahead. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze that carried the lingering fragrance of roses. Beneath his arm, the journal rested comfortably against his side. Its pages remained unwritten, yet somehow they no longer felt empty. After a time, Elias reached a small rise overlooking the valley below. He paused, turning back one final time. The house stood quietly in the distance, nestled among gardens bathed in morning gold. Its windows still glowed, softly, steadily, as though lantern light and sunrise had agreed to share the same space. For several moments, Elias simply looked, not attempting to memorize every detail, not fearing that forgetting would diminish what he had experienced, only appreciating The winding paths, the flowering hedges, the countless windows reflecting dawn. He placed the journal upon a nearby stone wall. Opening it carefully, the breeze stirred its blank pages, inviting, patient. He turned once more to the sentence written upon the first page. Some evenings deserve to be noticed before they become memories. A small smile touched his lips. Then, for the first time, Elias lifted the pen resting within the journal's spine. The tip hovered above the page. He considered what deserved to be written. Not the house itself, not its mysteries, not even its glowing windows. Instead, he wrote about the birds singing beyond the entrance hall, about dew resting upon rose petals, about the warmth of tea shared during rainy evenings, about laughter drifting through kitchen doorways, about blankets adjusted without ceremony, about ordinary kindnesses offered without expectation of recognition. Simple things, beautiful things, human things. When he finished, he read the words back to himself. They were imperfect, honest enough. Closing the journal gently, he looked toward the house one last time. "Thank you," he whispered. The morning breeze answered softly through the trees, as though carrying the sentiment home. Then Elias continued onward. Hours passed gently around him. The path widened. Villages stirred awake in the distance. Shopkeepers swept their doorways. Gardeners watered window boxes, overflowing with blooms. Children chased one another along cobblestone streets. Life unfolded everywhere, ordinary, unremarkable, extraordinary. Elias noticed the baker, who slipped an extra pastry into an elderly woman's bag, the young man who paused to help retrieve scattered papers from the roadside, the little girl who offered half of her apple to a patient old dog waiting beside a bench. Tiny moments, easily overlooked, yet each one glowed quietly beneath the surface of the day. The house had changed nothing, and everything. By late afternoon, Elias found himself resting beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree. The journal rested open across his knees. A breeze stirred its pages. He thought of Mira, of cinnamon kitchens, of tomorrow's unwritten window, of dawn shared within observatories high above sleeping gardens. A profound gratitude settled within him, not because life had become free from uncertainty, but because uncertainty no longer prevented beauty from being noticed. As evening approached, golden light softened across the landscape. The familiar hush preceding twilight settled gently over the world. Elias rose, adjusting the satchel across his shoulder. Ahead, lanterns flickered to life within distant cottages. Families gathered around dinner tables. Stories would soon be shared. Tea would be poured, blankets unfolded, laughter exchanged, windows glowing quietly against the deepening blue of evening. He stopped for a moment, watching, listening, present then, with a smile touched by understanding. Elias opened the journal once more, turning to a fresh page. The pen rested easily within his hand. Above him, the first evening stars emerged, steady, patient, hopeful. He lowered the pen to the paper and began to write. The lantern outside the cottage window flickered gently against the gathering dusk. Elias sat upon a weathered wooden bench beneath the shelter of an old maple tree. The journal rested open upon his lap. Its pages had begun to fill, not with extraordinary adventures, not with grand discoveries, but with moments, a stranger offering directions with unexpected kindness, the aroma of fresh bread drifting from a village bakery, the comfort of a warm cloak wrapped tightly against an evening breeze, the sound of distant laughter carried through open windows. He had started noticing, truly noticing. Above him, the sky deepened into shades of indigo and violet. Stars appeared one by one, unhurried, certain nearby. A family gathered around their supper table. Their conversation floated softly through the open kitchen window. Someone laughed. A chair scraped gently against the floor. A kettle began to whistle, the ordinary music of everyday life. Elias listened. A smile touched his lips. Carefully, he wrote another entry, not because he feared forgetting, but because remembering had become an act of gratitude. The house had taught him that. A cool breeze turned several pages of the journal. Elias rested his hand upon them. Thinking of Mira, he imagined her walking familiar lantern-lit corridors, straightening blankets, refilling teacups, welcoming weary travelers with gentle wisdom. The image brought comfort. Somewhere beyond countless winding paths, the house, where every window glowed, continued its quiet work, preserving moments of tenderness, of belonging, of love expressed through small, consistent acts. Yet Elias understood something now. The house had never existed merely to be visited. Its purpose had always been something greater, to teach those who entered its doors how to recognize glowing windows within their own lives. A child proudly sharing an imperfect drawing, a friend remembering exactly how tea should be prepared, a familiar voice asking how the day had gone, the feeling of arriving home after a long journey. Simple things, sacred things. The evening deepened. Lanterns illuminated cottages scattered across the hillside. From where Elias sat, they resembled stars resting gently upon the earth. Window after glowing window, stories unfolding quietly behind each pane of glass. A young couple washing dishes together, an elderly man reading beside the fire, a mother braiding her daughter's hair before bedtime, lives being lived, moments being woven, memories being created long before anyone recognized their significance. Elias closed the journal carefully, holding it against his chest. He thought of all the people still searching for extraordinary lives, still waiting for certainty, still believing happiness existed somewhere beyond the horizon. Perhaps, he reflected, the horizon had never been the destination. Perhaps life had always been here, waiting patiently within ordinary evenings, asking only to be noticed. The first crescent moon rose above the treetops. Silver light touched the pages of the journal. Elias stood, adjusting the satchel across his shoulder. His path stretched onward beneath the evening sky. There would be other journeys, other stories, other questions waiting patiently for their answers. He welcomed them, not because he had discovered every truth, but because he had learned how to walk beside uncertainty without losing sight of wonder. Before continuing down the road, he looked back toward the hillside cottages one final time. Their windows glowed softly against the night, warm, steady, inviting. A familiar tenderness settled within him. Then, with quiet certainty, Elias whispered the words that had become both blessing and reminder. May we notice them while they're still glowing. The evening breeze carried the sentiment gently into the world, past lantern-lit gardens, past rain-kissed windows, past kitchen tables and bedtime stories, past every ordinary moment waiting to be recognized for the gift it truly was. And somewhere, within a house hidden from maps, yet never beyond reach, lanterns continued to shine. Tea continued to steep. Stories continued to unfold, ready to welcome anyone who might one day need reminding that home is not always a place. Sometimes it is the people who make room for us, the kindness we choose to offer, the evenings we pause long enough to appreciate, the glowing windows we carry within us long after we have wandered on. And so, beneath a sky scattered with patient stars, Elias continued his journey, the journal tucked safely beneath his arm, his heart a little lighter, his gaze a little softer, his steps a little slower, not because he wished to delay the future, but because he finally understood the quiet beauty of the present. And wherever life might lead him next, he knew this with absolute certainty. There would always be another glowing window, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be cherished, waiting to remind him that even the most ordinary evenings can illuminate an extraordinary life. Good night, and may your own windows glow warmly tonight. Thank you for spending this evening within the house where every window glowed. If tonight's story brought you even a small sense of calm, I hope you carry that quiet feeling with you into the hours ahead. May you notice the gentle kindness in ordinary moments, the warmth of familiar routines, the comfort of simple presence, and the small, glowing windows life offers when we pause long enough to see them. If you ever find yourself returning to these stories, you are always welcome here. Stay close to this little space of peaceful storytelling. Whenever you need a moment to slow down, breathe, and rest. Until we meet again, take care of yourself. Rest gently, sleep peacefully, and may your own windows glow warmly tonight. Good night.